What's up in there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Game here, one of my discussion videos. Now, I recently did a video going over 5 games that I personally really love that I hope never to get remade. And kind of as a response to all these remakes that we've gotten in the recent period of time, and remakes that I'm sure we'll be getting in the near future. But now I decided we should probably flip the script a little bit and talk about 5 games that I think are absolutely more than deserving, or I think need a remake and would do phenomenally well in today's game market. So if you do happen to enjoy this video by the end, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to track me on my future videos. And remember, if you guys have any more discussion videos or topics that you would like me to talk about, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll try to get them up as soon as I can. So without wasting more time, let's start off with the first game out of 5 that I think is more than deserving of being remade in modern times. Now, the first game that I think is more than deserving of being remade for modern consoles and modern platforms is a game that for its time was a classic, and many consider it to be a classic now, and that is the very first Max Payne. Now, the first Max Payne was developed by Remade Entertainment and came out in 2001, right in the middle of the PlayStation 2 and Xbox era, so this is a pretty old game. Now, the last installment actually came out in the form of Max Payne 3, which came out almost like 10 years ago, it feels like. And I think that the first game is in much needing of a remake. Now, I recently tried to go back and replay it on my PlayStation 3, and boy, there's just so much to change. The controls for that are very stiff, which makes precise platforming for that game very difficult. I think some of the game mechanics could be worked on. I think some of the sound mechanics could be worked on. Now, I do like that the bullet time element is still present, but I just think that a modern day take on Max Payne would be so innovative. I picture a modern day version of Max Payne playing something like, imagine a game like Uncharted set in urban New York City with a cover place mechanic, with cinematics instead of a comic book storyboard, with bullet time, and having this kind of dark noir tour style being told. I mean, I really think that Max Payne, with all the modern gameplay updates, would just be an incredible game. You would have no need for, and I think it'd be one of the few games that I think could very much hold its own as a single-player game. I don't think you would need to try to add multiplayer as they did in Max Payne 3. I think it's a game that very much would be able to stand on its own, and I think would invite a lot of speed runs. And you could definitely add a little bit more into the story and change some things that I thought were very difficult, even by those standards. So that's why I think that the very first Max Payne is more than deserving of being remade for modern-day consoles. Now, the next game on my list of games I think is more than deserving of being remade is actually based off of one of the most iconic and popular Star Wars video games of all time for the 90s, and that is in the form of Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. Now, if you're a 90s kid like me, this game was huge back in the 90s when it first came out. It had its own brand and everything. It had its own comic book series. It had its own novel. It had its own audiobook. It had its own toy line. I mean, this was like the biggest push of Star Wars that we had seen since Return of the Jedi had been released back in the 80s, right before the prequels came out. And so I think that getting this game remade is absolutely more than deserving. Now, if you actually go back and try to replay this game, it's pretty rough. there's no question that the controls for this game make it a very rough game. But I think that it had so many different styles of gameplay. I mean, you had the third-person shooter element. You had the turret sections with the Outrider, which is to this day my favorite Star Wars vehicle of all time. You had the speeder section, which control-wise were just kind of crazy. And then you could actually do a full flight piloting scene in the last mission. And I think this is around the same era that Star Wars Rogue Squadron had come out. So there is several different gameplay elements, gameplay styles that you could add in one game. I just think that if you update the graphics, maybe even tweak this, maybe extend the story a little bit. Like the story for Shadows of the Empire, if anyone who's actually gone through it, is pretty expansive, especially taking place between the events of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. There's just a lot of things you could do. My only concern is, would Disney allow developers to put as much work into it as I think is needed? Because I see a remake of this game being kind of similar to something like what we might have gotten in Star Wars 1313 that never came out. I think that it would take that much effort to actually give this game the right amount of justice that it deserves. I mean, I'm not sure it would do much for the brand in terms of giving it more popularity, but I just think that a remake to this game with all these different elements and it being, embedded within the original Star Wars trilogy is something that I think a lot of fans would be very, very open for. I'm just curious if Disney would allow that to happen. But heck, I think this game would be awesome if it was remade. That's why it's on my list. Now, next game that I would love to see get remade might surprise some people because they just released this game on PlayStation 5 not too long ago, and it was a buggy mess. And they just updated a new patch that supposedly fix these bugs thanks to the fans kind of outpouring our problems with it. And I'm glad we pulled that off. And that is in the form, I think, a game that should be remade is The Legend of Dragoon. This is such an underrated JRPG, it's criminal. Now, as popular as Final Fantasy was back in the 90s, this game was doing things gameplay and mechanics-wise long before Final Fantasy was ever doing them. And not a lot of people talk about them. I think that the story around this game is phenomenal. I think some of the gameplay elements would be great. I could just imagine this world in updated graphics and improved gameplay styles, fleshing out some of the story elements, giving us more time with some of the characters. I think this would probably make this game more popular now than it ever was back then, because this game really fell under the radar. Not a lot of people were talking about this game, and I think it's very underrated and deserves more attention, which is why I think Legend of Dragoon, especially since they just re-released it, I think a lot of people would we totally welcome an opening for them remaking this game and giving it more attention, because this is a game that I absolutely think is deserving of it, which is why I would love to see The Legend of Dragoon be remade for modern consoles. Now, the next game I think is deserving and needing of a remake is one that might be some controversial to some fans, but we got to go to Capcom for this one. Now, since Capcom is in the business of remaking a lot of their older Resident Evil games, what if Capcom went back and started remaking some of their older Devil May Cry games? Which is why I think that the very, very first Devil May Cry game is absolutely needing of a remake. Big time. This game is the only installment that I've ever only played once. This game is rough. It's almost too hard in some senses, which is why maybe I didn't go back and play this game. And as much as people like to complain about Devil May Cry 2 and say it's a steaming pile of crap, I've actually played this way more times than Devil May Cry 1. I don't think this game is that bad. It's just criminally easy. While this one is just, I feel like, way too hard. Now, I think that, again, as I said earlier, if these guys are in the business of just going back and remaking some of these older games, we can actually continue the primary story of Devil May Cry, which I'm pretty sure when Devil May Cry 6 gets announced, it'll focus mainly on Nero. But let's go back and revisit Devil May Cry 1, and let's see how that's could be updated. I mean, I certainly think that with some improved gameplay mechanics, updating the graphics, flushing out some elements of the story, giving us a little more time with Trish and establishing her relationship with Dante, and even giving us more in-depth information on Moonius and how he was able to manipulate and gain control of Virgil, I think these story elements would go a long way. And I think the Devil May Cry franchise is not only a needing of a remake for the first game, I think this franchise is a needing of a prequel story involving Sparta, who is so important to the franchise yet we know very little about. So that's why I think that out of any Devil May Cry game that has ever been made, I think the first one is without question deserving of a remake for modern consoles. Now, the last game that I think is deserving of a remake has to go to Onimusha Warlords. Now, the crazy thing about that game is that they actually released a remastered for this about 4 years ago. Unfortunately, it wasn't very good, and it actually didn't even fix a lot of the problems that the first original game did have. So I think having a bottom-to-top remake of this game would be very, very welcoming, especially given the current state that gaming is in now. I mean, could you imagine a hack-and-slash style Devil May Cry game set in Japan with a more focus on horror than an action? And given how successful something like Ghost of Tsushima was with its gameplay style, I think that a remake for Onimusha would be incredible, especially if they could enhance and even improve some of the horror elements that game presented. And it could also take advantage of some of the more innovative game mechanics that modern hack and slash games have. So, yeah, I think Onimusha Warlords would be a great game to get remastered, or technically get remade. Excuse me. So those are 5 games that I think are deserving of remakes. What are some of games that you think or might be underrated, or you think are deserving of getting remade top to bottom for current day audiences, for not only older fans, but probably getting some new fans? Share your list with me and everyone else in the comments down below. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you all guys next time.